In this video, we're going to be covering what are 3D LUTs for photographers, how to use them in Adobe Lightroom and Camera Raw, and why you should be using them. So let's start with what a 3D LUT is. So it means 3D or three-dimensional lookup table. So this lookup table is a way of looking at the data from your raw photo and assigning a value to the hue, saturation, and luminance. So every single part of any raw photo out there has these values, and they're often called cube files, or they are called cube files, because you'll see here that this pixel essentially represents a cube of data, a cube of colors, a cube of hue, saturation, and luminance. So when we are designing a 3D LUT, we're essentially taking those values that were captured by whatever camera you have that created that raw file, and we're remapping them. So this can be very subtle shifts, or they can be huge shifts. But the important thing is, when thinking about a 3D LUT, is it's being applied to that raw photo, and it's not being applied on top of the photo like presets are. So presets, while they can change the contrast or the saturation, it's being applied on top. So a 3D LUT gives us more control, more dynamic range, and more flexibility in what we can do with that image when we apply it to the LUT at the raw level. Let me show you. Okay, so you'll see here that the images that we're using in this example are images that I took from our Natural Light tutorial with Danny Diamond, and I've made virtual copies of each one. So with this one, we can see here, if we were to compare, this is essentially the raw photo that has the, you'll see this Adobe color profile set up. And then you'll see this one. This one has our Cine 0 with shadow recovery of plus 25% and highlight recovery of plus 25% built in. So you'll notice with the histogram that if I move back to this photo, we're actually moving around this information, and nothing is actually changing with the sliders here. So let me open this up and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is our most basic Cine 0. This is the Cine 0 profile, and there's no shadow recovery or highlight recovery built into it. This one has highlight recovery of 25%. So you'll notice here in the histogram, you can see what happens when I'm just adding a little bit of recovery to our highlights. And if you see here, there is no clipping in this photo of the highlights. So there's still information here. We're getting pretty close in some of the shadows. So if we were to go over here, you'll see that we're starting to bring more detail into the shadows themselves. And we can do that with a few different photos. So here we have shadow recovery of 50% and highlight recovery of 25%. And we don't have any clipping in the shadows or the highlights. And the cool thing about how we made these is you can still fine tune the amount of this look that you want in. So if you want to create a look that is unified throughout your shoot, especially if you're shooting with natural light. If you think about this shoot and how we designed these, we specifically wanted to take an entire block of photos that were all used with natural light that do have a lot of variances, whether there was a cloud, whether it's just a different time of day, whether the settings on the camera were different. All of those things are variables that really affect how a LUT can be applied. So we created cinematic color looks with the Cine 0 all the way to Cine 15. So there's 16 different cinematic color grades that we've used. And then we've baked in a lot of shadow recovery and highlight recovery. So you can start from a similar place or start from the same place with a lot of your different photos, and then apply color on top of that, whether that is with a preset or if you're taking it to Photoshop, you can then really get into the fine details of how you're going to create a color grade. So you can color grade up front with a LUT, and that could be your color throughout most all the way to the end. Or you could start with a LUT that's a little bit more neutral that we've provided, and then do a lot of your color work. So the option is still yours, but really the point and the benefit of these LUTs is shadow recovery, highlight recovery, and adding this to the raw level that's remapping that information. So we have way more flexibility and way more dynamic range when we're editing in post. And let me show you a little bit more. So you'll see here that I've got the Cine 0 look. Now, once we get into the Cine 1, you'll see that we're gonna go down to shadow recovery, highlight recovery, and I'll just do a side-by-side comparison here. So you'll see this is the raw level, you know, pretty neutral. And right here, now you'll start to see there's much more cooler tones in the shadows and the highlights. So if this is something that you want to start from and you kind of know this is the look you're going for, you can do this and start from a place and really just explore what this looks like, you know, before sending it to Photoshop, before applying all these grades. It's a much faster way to achieve a look and create looks across a set of photos. So if you're a wedding photographer, you're someone that's, you know, shooting a lot, you know, creating this custom look and then turning that into a pre-saved preset is something you can do. And you can also create presets, which we have specifically for this type of photo that we'll get into in a minute. So here you'll see that we'll go back into develop, and I'll go into some more of these looks. So we have the Cine 2 look, starting to get a little bit more back to warmth in the skin, or this is the Cine 3. So this is basically no shadow recovery, no highlight recovery. You'll see here that we're starting to lose a little bit of detail. We have our alarms that are going off for our shadows. So if we come down here and look for Cine 3, we're gonna essentially turn that off. So even though that, you know, this image itself, you know, with this mapping might end up crushing some of the blacks, we've built it in a way that you can start from a very clean place and edit from here. So let's look at a few other photos. Got another example here of, you know, clearly this isn't a great photo of the model, but what we're showing here is we've got clipping in the highlights. We've got, you know, pretty dark. We're going to be able to start and kind of remap what this raw file looks like with a lot of options. So, you know, let's say that let's go into something a little further down. Let's go into Cine 8, see what Cine 8 looks like. So we've got shadow recovery 100 and highlight recovery 25. You'll see here that we're still clipping right here, right? So we've still got this, we're basically losing some of our highlights, and we have the additional option to start to bring some of it back. So you'll see here as you move the slider down, we can see where we're starting to lose detail. We're losing detail in her hair. So we can kind of choose to bring some or all of that back with these different looks. So, you know, if we were to really like the look of, you know, Cine 8, and we wanted to apply this to a lot of our raw images so they match and gives us the fastest way to come up with a color grade in post, we can do that here. So let's say that, you know, I like Cine 8. So it's basically going to give us quite a pretty good comparison. So let's just do a comparison of these two. So we've got the original raw file, and then we've essentially got the new raw file, right? So quite a big difference, and you'll still notice that If I go into the raw file here, nothing has changed. We still have the ability to take our highlights all the way down or all the way up with that additional flexibility while still being able to bring everything all the way back or all the way up. And then obviously this is just for example. It gives us quite a bit more dynamic range into the photo itself and allows us for a much more fine-tuned approach to color grading. So the other really cool thing about the benefit to doing this, let's say you don't even use Lightroom. Let's say you're more in the Camera Raw and the Photoshop workflow, which is great. Okay, so same thing here. If we use, let's say, this image here, even though that this already has this Cine 1 look, I'll go into copy. Let's just change this back to probably the default of what you might see in your Lightroom. So if I open this in a Smart Object workflow in Photoshop, it's going to open up without anything applied. So I can just double click it, and in Camera Raw, same thing. We're going to be able to go into Browse, and I'm going to be able to see all of our presets here. And choose one that is to my liking. So I'm gonna go a little bit further down. Obviously she's outside, it's not cold. So I'm gonna look for something with a little bit more warmth. So Cine 7 has a little bit of that kind of look to it. And you'll see here with a little bit of shadow recovery, highlight recovery, 25. I could probably go push it a little bit more. Can really kind of fine tune here. So you'll see that we're getting more details back in the shadow and the highlights, and it's going to give us a better starting place. So I can then, always, since I'm using a Smart Object workflow at the raw level, I'm going to be able to really kind of fine tune it and come back to this photo and change it really whenever I want. So if I'm, further on down the road, dodging and burning, doing a lot of the cleanup, and I want to really adjust that raw look or duplicate it and create several different base layers and then blend them together using a workflow that has several of the raw files that you're then masking in places that you either want that look and don't want that look. It's totally up to you on how you do that. So then as you save it back into Lightroom itself. So, and you'll be able to see that, it saved it back, and now we have this saved as a PSD that we can use, however we like. Okay, now that we've kind of covered the basics of what a 3D LUT is and, potentially how to use it in your workflow, these can also be used with presets. So we've included 10 Lightroom presets and 10 Lightroom AI presets that are going to be different for everyone, depending on where you start with your images. Let me show you how this works. So you'll see here that we have, let's just take our raw file here. So this is, Cine 1 is a little bit of a cooler look. I'm gonna go into, back into the browser here. So I'm going to browse, and I'm going to, let's just start with Cine 0, and which is a little bit more of a neutral. And I'm going to do just kind of like a basic browse through of, all right, so we've got recovery of 25 and 25. Let's just see what fine tuning a little bit of this looks like. This is really, for the most part at this point, kind of subjective of, what you like. you might want to blow out a lot of the highlights, and you might, like that look. For me, just for this example, I'm just going to start somewhere with the highlight recovery at 25 and 25. And then you can kind of see a lot of these additional cinematic looks that are going to, vary from photo to photo to kind of give, this to me looks a little more of like an antiqued, kind of washed out sepia, more contrast. This is definitely a lot of, pinks and magentas in the, midtones. So you can kind of see like the range of these presets, and just like the LUTs, you have the ability to, let's say we add a preset, say we like this one, but that's too much for my liking. We can dial that back, and at the same time we can be dialing this up or down. And this is just an example. We can add more to it, so we're now at 111%. We can turn this up. We can keep looking at other changes and pivots to the raw level. And pretty quickly we can kind of explore looks, right? And like the LUT workflow is for being able to explore color quickly. We don't want to have to like open it in Photoshop, add a bunch of layers and spend all of this time, or like add actions to it. And we can, have these basically like, 3D LUTs. It's kind of a preset, but it's only a preset because it's a predetermined look. And then add these presets on top of it, which are really cool and designed specifically for these. And then through the sliders changing on both of those, you can start from a place that is maybe pretty close or closer to what you wanted to start with without having to do, all of the retouching. Because let's face it, a lot of workflows that have been taught start at the raw level, and color grading isn't really done until the very end. And for me personally, like color is kind of like maybe the most important part of an image. It's a big part of the emotion of the image and the storytelling aspect. So if you wait to the very end to be able to choose your color, you might be kind of limited on maybe what colors are available, depending on what you did further below your layer stack. So in this situation, even if I wanted to switch to a different color grade, you can kind of see this is definitely a much cooler temperature-wise look than anything. And then getting a little bit more into the warmth here. So, right off the bat, I actually kind of like this quite a bit. I've got this NOLA Cine look, and maybe dial that back just a little bit, kind of see if anything's starting to clip. You can see, that obviously that's clipping there. That's way too much. But you can kind of dial it back, and you'll see here that since I've added this NOLA preset, that is actually changing the sliders. So we've got the 3D LUT that's not changing any of our sliders and actually applying it to that raw level and remapping the hue, saturation, and luminance. And then the presets that we've added are doing quite a bit. Okay, so this is a really good introductory look at what 3D LUTs are, how we design these specifically for natural light with a lot of highlight and shadow recovery built in, and then how to use presets on top of that to really fine tune a look that you want to start with. So 3D LUTs are a great way to explore color up front. It's a great starting place to kind of, get your entire team on board if possible with kind of where you're going with that look. And it's really easy to do in a captured workflow if you're shooting on location too. So keep that in mind when you want to apply a look like this to all of your images really quickly. You can do that at the raw level. And the best part is it's not destructive. So this is a non-destructive workflow that allows you to change your mind down the road. So really excited for you to try out the NOLA collection, available at proedu.com, and is always included for our Pro Plan members.